Today's lecture provides a brief introduction to the issues and concepts that we'll be discussing in weeks 3, 4, and 5 of the course. We'll be moving from an analysis of the legal rules and norms of the international human rights system to a discussion of the international, regional, and national institutions that are available to monitor states' behavior and hopefully improve their behavior with respect to the human rights commitments that they've undertaken. As we consider these issues, there'll be a set of overarching questions that'll inform our analysis. First, what mechanisms are available to monitor whether states are in fact complying with their human rights obligations? What mechanisms are available to expose potential violations of international human rights law? And what sorts of remedies are available to victims to provide some kind of compensation or relief from past violations and hopefully to prevent a recurrence of those violations? We'll look at these overarching questions in a number of different geographic contexts. In week 3, we'll focus on the mechanisms in the UN human rights system, in particular both the expert or treaty bodies and political bodies such as the UN Human Rights Commission and the UN Human Rights Council. In week 4, we will turn to regional and sub-regional mechanisms, and here the key institutions we'll focus on are international courts and commissions, which, among other things, provide a mechanism for individuals to file complaints against governments alleging violations of protected rights and freedoms. In week 5 of the course, we'll turn to national mechanisms, domestic prosecutions, truth and reconciliation commissions, and universal jurisdiction among the key topics that we'll consider in week 5. Let me conclude this brief introduction by giving you an overview of the specific topics that we'll talk about in week 3. We'll begin with a brief analysis of international relations theory and human rights to provide a theoretical or conceptual framework for understanding why states violate human rights and what sorts of institutions or design features of international organizations can help to prevent and remedy those violations. We'll spend the rest of the week looking at the UN human rights system. We'll start by discussing UN treaty bodies, such as the UN Human Rights Committee, whose work we've already studied, and the CEDAW Committee, whose work we've already studied as well. We'll then turn to UN charter bodies, focusing on the UN Human Rights Commission and its transition to the UN Human Rights Council, which replaced it in 2006. The final section of this week will focus on humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. These are concepts that are invoked to justify military and other sorts of forceful responses to widespread, massive human rights violations. I hope you'll find these materials to be as interesting as I do, and that we'll have an opportunity through the discussion forums to talk about the issues that they raise.